So Dragon's Dogma 2 seems like it is going to be one of the most impressive launches of 2024. There's so many unique elements to this game, and some of them are genuinely groundbreaking inclusions. So today I wanted to go over 10 super impressive mechanics in Dragon's Dogma 2. Now the first 3 of these are actually to do with the pawn system. For those who aren't aware, the pawns are essentially a group of companions that will follow you around. You can make your own main pawn in the same way that you can make your own character, and then the other 2 are essentially just hired throughout the world. Now the first mechanic to do with that is very, very impressive is that your pawns will actually learn traits and even playstyles based on the way that you play. The devs have said that there is super intelligent AI systems in the game that will allow them to learn as the game goes on, pretty much meaning that the way that you play will actually shape the way that your pawns play as well. Now the example they've said for this is that if you, for example, early on in the game are constantly spamming healing potions, you're maybe just getting low on health because obviously you're new to the game, you're trying to learn the game yourself, and you are constantly using those healing potions, well, your pawns will actually see that and think that that is a viable strategy they should be using, at which point they will eventually start to use all of their healing potions constantly as well, which can be seen as a good thing or a bad thing. On the good side, obviously that means that they're going to be constantly healed. You don't have to keep reviving them over and over again. But on the flip side, it means they are going to go through their resources faster than they probably need to. And that is all based on the way that you have been playing the game so far. So that's obviously just one example. That sounded more like a negative example in that if you're not playing correctly, they will learn to not play correctly as well. But there are going to be so many examples where you playing in a really good way will actually teach them those good traits as well. And I thought that was a very, very impressive mechanic from Capcom. Now, something else that I found very impressive is that you can actually hire other people's pawns. Like I said, you can just actually make your own main pawn. Unfortunately, you can only make one of them, but that pawn that you make can actually be hired by other people in other worlds. For example, the main pawn that I make, you guys can actually hire that pawn into your own game, and that pawn that I have made can actually follow you guys around on your journey as well, which is a really interesting way of kind of adding a multiplayer community-based aspect into what is obviously a single player game. This game is completely single player. You can play it completely offline, but they have got at least one way of making us feel like we are involved in a bigger community, and that is a really, really cool way of doing that in my opinion. Now, the next mechanic actually leads directly from that one, and this is called Dragon's Plague. Now, if your pawn is being hired over and over by multiple people and constantly traveling between your world and other people's worlds, it can actually contract a disease known as Dragon's Plague. Now, on their website, the description for Dragon's Plague is that Dragon's Plague is a contagious disease-like condition that infects pawns as they travel between worlds. Rather than being weakened, pawns with the disease are said to display remarkable performance and to become conspicuously bold in their speech and behavior. According to folklore, when the symptoms of Dragon's Plague reach a terminal stage, it will result in devastating calamity, but the veracity of those claims is unclear. So as you can see by that description, let's just say you guys keep using my pawn that I've made. Eventually, after traveling between so many worlds, he will potentially contract what is known as Dragon's Plague. He will then actually become a bit stronger, but it will also make him a little bit bolder in the way that he speaks to people, and just his general behaviors will actually change. And as it says at the end there, it can actually end in a negative way as well. The way they described it as a devastating calamity, that does not sound like a good thing to me. I don't know if that means that they will eventually die or something like that. Maybe even they'll turn evil, I'm not too sure. But it is a really, really cool element to me that once again kind of adds to that multiplayer element, in that if people are constantly using other people's pawns, there is actually in-game consequences to that as well. Now, another very impressive mechanic is the day and night system in this game. Now, this isn't something that is groundbreaking. This has been done in a few other games before, but I don't think I've ever really seen it done to this extent in such a big open world RPG like this. I've mostly only seen it done in games where this is kind of the whole point of the game. Now, a lot of games obviously have a day and night system. However, the nighttime element of that in Dragon's Dogma 2 is actually a little bit different than normal, in that one, it is essentially pitch black. It's not like it's just slightly darker and it can still go around doing whatever you need to do. It is essentially pitch black and you will not be able to see unless you actually have a torch with you. And even then, you can only really see just directly in front of you. You can't see for miles and miles in front of you or anything like that. But the other side of this as well is that nighttime is so much more dangerous than it is at daytime, where there are actually certain enemy types that only come out during the night, and they are very, very deadly, meaning it is very, very dangerous to be out at night, and it's probably something that most people aren't going to want to do outside of when they most likely force us to throughout certain points in the story. Now, before we go any further, if you guys are enjoying the video so far, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. There is plenty more content like this on the way, both in the lead up to launch as well as plenty more after launch as well. So make sure you don't miss out. Now, another mechanic that I found to be very impressive is that the enemies in this game are completely unscripted, meaning, for example, they won't be spawning in the exact same places every time. They're also unscripted in the sense of sometimes there'll be an enemy on their own, sometimes there'll be enemies in packs. They are just almost free thinking enemies. And one element to that is that they can actually ambush you while you are fast traveling or just wandering around throughout the world. They can literally just come out of nowhere and almost have like a planned attack that, like I said, is unscripted. So it isn't technically planned, but at random, they will start to form a plan and then literally just ambush you out of nowhere. A lot of people who have played the game early have pretty much said that it feels like there is always something going on in this game. It feels like you're always on your toes and that there's always some sort of enemy that is kind of chasing you down, whether you have approached them or they've approached you. And I thought that was very, very interesting. I haven't played that many games before where, at least unscripted anyway, you can get ambushed by enemies. Most of the time when that happens, it is something that is kind of done on purpose by the developers, and it is something that is meant to happen at that point. Something else that is pretty damn awesome is that we see characters here actually grabbing the feet of these massive birds, whether they're eagles or whatever, I'm not too sure, and they're using them to essentially fly to different locations. Now, I played Dragon's Dogma 1 when it first came out, but I honestly cannot remember if this was in that game or not. I was right in the midst of playing Skyrim as well, so to be honest, every time I think of Dragon's Dogma 1, I just get overwhelmed by my Skyrim memories and I completely forget almost everything about that game. But I thought this was a really, really solid mechanic to allow people to get to areas that we probably can't get to otherwise. And I dare say this is potentially going to be a skill we have to actually learn, making it almost like a bit of Metroidvania, and that you can't get to certain places until you have learned to actually do this. Now, something else that is very impressive is to do with changing vocations throughout the game. Now, this isn't groundbreaking by any means. This is essentially a respec, which obviously many fantasy RPG type games have, but this one feels a little bit more impressive than just your typical respec. Most respecs in other games aren't really tied to class systems and stuff like that, or the vocations as they're called in this game. It is simply just reallocating your skill points, which is kind of like the more basic version of this. Now, in this game, you can full on change your vocation, which not only means you will be changing where you can use your skill points, but you can even change the main weapons that you're using and stuff like that, and essentially completely change your playstyle at almost any point throughout this game, which is something I feel like a lot of games out there don't really do. RPGs like this often do that on purpose, that once you've kind of locked into a class, you do have to kind of stick with that class unless you want to, restart, or it's going to cost you a lot, for example, to respec. So there's always like a pro and con list to actually respecing. In this game, it feels like there is essentially no downside to it. And for me anyway, that is a really good change, simply because there is so many awesome looking vocations that I know for a fact I want to change between all of them and give every single one of them a try. Now, this mechanic was in the first game as well, but jumping on the back of some of these larger enemies is a really cool mechanic to me, and they have drastically improved it in this game compared to how it was in the first game. Often in the first game, if you were climbing any of these beasts, for example, at a 45-degree angle, there was no way that you could essentially stand up. You were just climbing them and you had to kind of get to the very top of them to be able to stand up and then deal damage, or at least deal the most damage that you could. But in Dragon's Dogma 2, they have confirmed that if that enemy isn't really moving around too much, even if you're on a slight angle, you can stand up, because as long as they're still enough, you're not going to get thrown off the back of them, which means it is essentially just a little bit more clean and refined than it was in the first game. And as you can see throughout a bunch of this gameplay, this looks absolutely unreal, climbing on the back of some of these beasts, some of the dragons and the big Talos. It looks like there's going to be some absolutely epic boss fights in this game, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Now, getting back to the pawn system, this one is a little bit smaller, but I had to throw this in here because this one is super impressive to me. We see a moment throughout the gameplay where the character is, like I mentioned earlier, grabbing onto the legs of one of those eagles. It seems as though the eagle either gets too high or they simply just shake the character free, at which point they fall to what would inevitably be their death. But as you can see, the pawn actually catches that character and saves them from a certain death, which is a really, really cool mechanic. Now, I don't know if this is just default, or if you have to have kind of trained your pawns to do that. I'm not really too sure how that's going to work, but either way, I thought that was a really, really impressive mechanic. Now, last but not least, we also have another small one, and this is about using the environment to your advantage. Now, again, plenty of other games out there have done this before, but the way that they show it off in this game looks absolutely insane. We see the thief actually fighting against one of these massive trolls, fighting with hand-to-hand combat, which probably doesn't sound like it is ideal for someone with some small daggers. So then, as you can see, that thief actually grabs one of these barrels and throws it at what looks to be some sort of crack in the wall, at which point it explodes and a heap of water comes rushing out of it, pretty much forcing that troll away and looking like it deals a fair amount of damage too, because the troll actually bends over, looking as though they're in pain. So this is just one example of being able to use your environment to your advantage. Like I said, this has been done plenty of times before, but that was a pretty great showcase of how that can actually work. That was a pretty big element of destruction that was just thrown in there when a barrel hits a certain wall. So anyway, those are 10 of the most impressive mechanics that I've noticed so far in all of the gameplay and stuff they've shown for Dragon's Dogma 2. Be sure to leave down in the comments which one you guys thought was the most impressive. I'm definitely keen to hear all of your thoughts. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.